You're listening to the Nourish Child Podcast, episode number 53.
Welcome to the Nourish Child Podcast, a show about childhood nutrition, feeding kids, and dealing with the ups and downs of growing a healthy child. Here's your host, registered dietitian and childhood nutrition expert, Jill Castle.
Welcome to the Nourish Child Podcast. I'm your host, Jill Castle. In case this is your inaugural episode, the Nourish Child Podcast is a show about childhood nutrition, feeding kids, and dealing with the ups and downs of raising healthy ones, inside and out. Today, we are talking about meal planning. In other words, I am addressing the daily grind of preparing meals and how to make them easier and less stressful for you. Helping me sort this out is my guest, dietitian Jessica Levinson. Today's show notes are available with all the links I mention over at jillcastle.com. When I was in full-time private practice and my kids were in grade school and middle school, I was a meal planning maven. I couldn't do it any other way. On Sundays, I would plan my week's worth of dinners, make my grocery list, and head to the grocery store, stock my kitchen, and feel very relaxed, knowing that everything I needed for the week was in my kitchen. If you heard my interview with my daughter in episode 47, you know we ate dinner together every night of the week. So there were a lot of meals to plan and prepare. I had my own routine going, one that I figured out, but today, thank goodness, we have people like Jessica who can help make this, okay, let's face it, daunting task simple and easy. Jessica Levinson is a nationally recognized nutrition expert with a focus on culinary nutrition and communications. Jessica's passion lies in the kitchen, where she develops nutritious and delicious recipes to feed her family and to inspire others to do the same. On her blog, Jessica shares easy recipes, meal planning tips, and school lunchbox ideas. You'll also get an inside look into the challenges she faces in the kitchen and around the table. I know if you get just even one pearl of wisdom from Jessica, your life in the kitchen will be that much better. I know you're dying to hear what she has to say, so without further delay, here's Jessica. Welcome, Jessica, to the Nourish Child Podcast.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here today.
If everyone knew we live, 30 miles away from each other? We're so close, but we're doing this over the internet.
It's pretty funny, actually. And I love the fact that we live closer now, because when I first learned about you and, you were on my radar when I was, in school for nutrition, I was like, you were in Nashville at the time. And it's so much fun that you're close now and we get to meet for lunch and stuff.
I know it is. It is so much fun. And one of the fun things about doing this show is being able to interview other nutrition professionals and really learn for myself, but more importantly for the listeners here. And I know that my listeners always want to hear a little bit about your personal life. And I know you have twin daughters. So tell us a little bit. We all know you're a nutrition expert because I've just done your introduction, but tell us a little bit about your family life and your work and how you blend that all together.
Sure. So I have twin girls who are turning 6 in just a couple of weeks. I still can't believe it. Since having them, I feel like my whole life has just been all about the kids. I don't even remember life before kids these days. And my work, I've been a dietitian for over 10 years. And when I first started in nutrition, I certainly wasn't as focused on feeding families and feeding kids. My philosophy has always been about moderation and that you should enjoy your food, and food is meant to be delicious and enjoyed, and that, restriction is not the answer. But as my personal life has evolved, so too has my nutrition work, and my blog at jessicalevinson.com has changed as well. So I do have more of a focus on feeding families and helping moms and dads and other caregivers, help them get healthy meals on the table that their kids will eat, because that I know is such a hard task for so many people. I see it with my friends. And I'm pretty lucky. My girls have always been really good eaters and adventurous eaters since they were little. But what's so interesting is how it's changing to be like the opposite now. I feel like most kids expand their palates as they get older, or at least people think that's what should happen. And my kids, I think because they see what their peers are now eating less of what they used to. And so it's just been an interesting evolution. And I'm sort of in this with all the other parents. I'm an expert, but I'm also learning as I go.
Yeah. Yeah. And it is always interesting when you start to recognize that, or I know I felt this way as my kids got older, that my influence was still very strong and still the prime influence, but boy, the world outside really does have a strong influence. And I'm sure you're seeing that with food selection based on what they're experiencing at school. And I think they're kindergarten now, right?
It's really interesting. Right now, I pack their lunch actually every day, but they had asked me if they could do hot lunch a couple of days when the next session starts, which is after winter break. And I said yes. And, it's sort of hard for me because I love knowing what's in their lunchbox and I can see what they ate or what they didn't eat when they come home. And I know how to balance out the rest of their day based on that. And so this will be interesting for me. It's the first time that really I will have no clue what they're eating unless they tell me, which, as a type A personality, it's very hard, but it's also so important for them to have some of that independence. And I do know that.
Yeah. Yeah. So have you thought about how you will handle sort of your inquiry of, whether they're eating or not, or what they're eating at school? How will you go about that?
So I have thought about that a little bit because I've thought about it even when they go on play dates now at somebody else's house or anytime, if they're at a birthday party and I deal with that. My plan, I don't like to make too big of a deal about the food because I don't want them to feel like I'm micromanaging them. But at the same time, I do want to be able to balance out their day and their week. I try to look at things a little more broader than just one day. But my plan is to go over the menu with them ahead of time and to tell them what's on the menu the day that they have hot lunch and to see what, let them know what the choices are and remind them about a balanced plate because we've talked about that a lot before and they know the basics of like, you're supposed to have your fruits and your veggies and your, protein and of course your carbs and they love carbs but they know that they need to have some of that balance. And so we'll talk through it. I don't want to give them the third degree when they get home. I'll have to sort of see how it goes. They may say to me, Mommy, guess what? I had French toast today because one of the days that I sign them up for is breakfast for lunch. And, we'll just sort of have to see how it goes. But I definitely plan on going over the menu with them ahead of time so that they know what there is and what their choices will be.
Yeah, I think that's a really smart idea. I used to do that with my kids too. And I can completely empathize with the feeling of not wanting to be, make it the nutrition inquisition the minute they walk in the door. And I think it's even more of a concern and maybe a loaded issue when you're a dietitian. I mean, I always felt very sensitive about the fact that I definitely don't want to play the nutrition monitor card all the time. I really want to set the tone of, I believe in them. I believe that they can make good choices. I know that they will make good choices. And with all the information they need, I think they can make good choices. And that trust, that having that trust in them to, be able to choose a balanced meal and self-regulate their intake. That's a big one for a lot of parents.
Yes. And that has been a challenge for sure. I mean, my girls are different. One of them tends to do a better job self-regulating. The other one, it's definitely harder for her. And there are times where I have to say, let's stop, let's take a pause. But again, I'm trying not to make a big deal about it because I don't want it to be an issue. And I think as a dietitian, it is a little bit harder for us because my girls know that I'm a dietitian. On the one hand, they love telling their friends, my mommy's a dietitian and look at what she made me. And on the other hand, if they want an excessive amounts of treats or something, they use that sort of against me. So they're smart. They know what they're talking about.
Oh yeah. Yeah. So I remember actually I interviewed my oldest daughter on the podcast back in December about eating in college, but a lion's share of the conversation was about what it was like to grow up with a mom who's a dietitian. And did you feel limited, restricted? Did you feel like, nutrition information was shoved down your throat every single day of your life? And just getting her impression. And we had never talked about it before. So it was really very interesting. And the old adage, less is more, is definitely holds true with being a dietitian mom and raising your kids. You want to give them enough information, but if you you can easily go overboard because that's what you do every day and you have a lot of information to give. So I invite you to listen to that episode because it might give you a little bit of, an insight onto the end of the road when they fly the nest or fly the coop, what their experiences are and how they feel about them.
Yeah, I definitely, that just piqued my interest so much. I'm so interested in hearing that. It's funny, sometimes I ask like the babysitters who come who are in high school, sometimes they're the ones giving the meals and they'll say, oh, my mom cooked like this. And I'll ask them sometimes like, was your mom strict about what you ate or things like that? And it's so interesting to hear. I can't wait to listen to that episode with your daughter.
Yeah. Yeah. So, all right, let's talk about meal planning because I know a lot of listeners out there are in some phase of meal planning. They're either doing it on a regular basis, they've dipped their toes into it and have tried it and dipped their toes out, or they're not doing it at all. So tell us how you got into meal planning, and you've really made meal planning a big cornerstone of the work that you do. So how'd you get into it, and have you always been interested in it?
So I have always been a planner, and I just feel like it's the only way to make sure that you get things done the way you want it. And honestly, I can't really remember, like I said, I can't remember a life before my kids. So for me, meal planning became an even more important aspect of my life once the girls were born. And just in order for me to feed myself well, to feed my husband well, even before the girls were eating solids, it was important for me to have a plan of action and know that I was going to have all the ingredients I needed on hand in order to get a healthy meal on the table.
Mm-hmm. So obviously it's changed over the years since you added children to your family. And do you find that you're sticking to that meal plan, or are you, making a plan and then sort of modifying it as the week goes by, or how do you approach it for your family?
So I post my menu plan almost every week. I haven't done such a great job lately because things have been super busy, but I still write it for myself, even if I don't post it on my website. But I have a section called Menu Plan Monday on my website, and I always write down my menu ahead of time. And for the most part, I stick to it. There are definitely times where I end up having a lot more leftovers of something than I expected. And so I'll end up crossing off, dinner for Wednesday night if we're going to have leftovers from Tuesday night. And then I'll actually move that item to the next week, especially if I've already bought the ingredients for it and they're perishable items. It's sort of, you have to see how things go. But for the most part, I try to stick to it because it's my organization. If I don't write it down, I will completely forget. I mean, my memory these days is such that I just won't remember what I had planned on. And I look back at that.
Yeah. Yeah. So walk us through, Jessica, what it takes to plan your week of meals. It's like, walk us through the step by step. How do you think about it in terms of your thought process, and then in terms of any tools you use or how you go about structuring everything? Just walk us through the step by step.
Sure. So the first thing I do is I look in my refrigerator and my freezer and my pantry, and I see what ingredients I have on hand that need to be used up, especially in the fridge. Because if I have a head of broccoli that's, been in the fridge for a couple of days, I want to get that used up before it goes to waste. So once I see what I have on hand, I'll either look through some of my recipes on my site or things that, I know my kids love, or that's a family favorite, and I'll add that to the menu, or I'll look into some cookbooks sometimes. I still do like looking at old-fashioned cookbooks. I know not everybody is so into them anymore, but for me, it's like, there's nothing like looking into a real cookbook. And then I'll also look at Pinterest, because I have a lot of boards on my own Pinterest that I have pinned other recipes to from other food bloggers and other websites. And so based on the ingredients I have on hand, what the schedule is for the week, let's say in terms of, if it's a holiday, or if there's, my kids are going to be out at an activity late, I want to make sure that that's a night that I have something really quick and easy that I can get on the table. So based on all of that, I start putting together, the main course and then side dishes. And I actually started including lunch on my menu plans and snacks a couple of years ago, because I had to pack lunch for the girls, and I wanted to make sure that I wasn't having too much repetition. So if I was, let's say, if they were having a sandwich for lunch, then I would do a more protein heavy dinner to balance it out. And that would be sort of how I would come up with the plan.
Mm-hmm. And then do you write it down on a piece of paper, or do you have a digital tool that you use? Or
Yes.
I know you posted on your blog, but
I write it down on a piece of paper, and I finally now have something hanging in my kitchen that I can put it on so that everyone can see it. My girls aren't reading it, but eventually my hope is that then this way they can look at it as well. And also for me, because like I said, if I don't write it down, I won't remember, and it's a good reference for me. And then I also make a grocery list based on that menu plan. So any groceries that I need that I don't have for the meals that I'm making, I'll add that to my notes section on my phone. And there are so many apps out there, but the truth is I find that my notes section is just the easiest for me. I just keep a running list, even like if I have something that I'm finishing up, like let's say soy sauce is almost at the bottom, I'll add that to my list so that I always have one on hand in my pantry. And luckily I have the space for that. So it really helps. And like the other day I ran out of rice vinegar and I had none, and I was like, how did this happen? And I was going crazy. And so I started thinking like, what can I use in place? Because I was making something. So for me, having that plan in place and having the grocery list to go along with it is so key, because otherwise you end up not having something that you need to cook your meal. And that can really be frustrating in the moment.
yeah, and it can ruin your plan, basically.
Yes, absolutely.
So when you do your meal plans, you write it on a piece of paper, you have your grocery list. Do you have a particular day that you shop, that you repeat every single week, or is that variable?
So I used to do it on the weekends because that's when I felt like I had the most time. But honestly, the stores are so crowded on the weekends, and I luckily have the flexibility. I work from home, so I'm able to go on Monday morning. So usually I get the girls on the bus Monday morning, I come back home, and I get ready to go out to the supermarket. And my husband always jokes and he laughs about the fact that when he met me, I would go to like 5 different supermarkets. I would go to the farmer's market to get the fresh tomatoes in the summer, and I'd go to, this market for this and that market for that. And he just thinks like that's crazy that I would do that. But I am pretty particular about my groceries, but I've gotten it down to a science for the most part. And I have my go-to supermarkets that I pick up certain ingredients at. And then there are certain supermarkets, like in New York, we have Fairway, which I absolutely love. And that was one thing I was sad about losing when I moved out of the city. But luckily there's one actually not too far from my house, but it's still, I have to get on the highway. So I go there usually once every couple of weeks to do like a big shop, because there are some ingredients that are there that I can't get anywhere else. So, but for the most part, I have my perishable items that I buy on a weekly basis, and I have my routine of going and getting it done. And I know that that doesn't work for everybody, because obviously if you work in an office and you work, you don't have time during the week, let's say, to go. So I find going like first thing in the morning, if you can, is probably the best time, because they're usually getting their shipments in, and then it's not as crowded and crazy as if you go like 1:00 on a Sunday afternoon.
Oh yeah. I really try to avoid the grocery store on the weekends, and I'm an early morning grocery shopper as well, and always have been, just because the crowds are just really minimal. You can get in and get out. So going to lots of different grocery stores, that's a luxury of time. When you become much more busy with kids and work and all that stuff, you have to, as you said, find one place or a couple of places that you can be super efficient with and that has everything you need.
That's right. No more going to the farmer's market every week for my tomatoes.
Yeah, you'll have to grow them.
Oh, yes, I know. It's funny that you say that, because I say every summer I really should start a vegetable garden, but I'm nervous about not having the time or the patience for the upkeep of it. But maybe one day I will.
Yeah. I've been running a garden in my backyard for the last few years, but my son took it over last year because of the very same thing. I don't have the time or the patience, or it's one of those things you got to put on your calendar or on your schedule to make sure it gets the proper attention. Now, I wanted to circle back to, you had mentioned that you look at your week and you consider the evenings that are busy, and you make a consideration or a consolation in your meal plan for those busy nights. Now, I know a lot of the listeners of this show have kids that are like mine, and probably like yours, going to activities after school, sports practices, sports games, church requirements and activities, and that whole dinner hour, the idea of having, a half an hour to prepare dinner for your family is not a reality for a lot of families. So, how do you skirt around that or make a consideration for that in your meal plan? And how would you advise other families do that?
So I think a big part of it, and this is why meal planning in general is so important, because you want to be able to know in advance that you're going to have these issues coming up. A big part of it is prepping in advance. And so using your weekend time or vacation time to cook things that you can make in batches and put in the freezer. So one thing I like to do is, if I'm making a big thing of chili, I may double it. I may double the recipe and then put it into individual portioned containers in the freezer so that I can take them out, defrost them. And that's even something that I can then throw in a thermos if we need to. I'm not quite there at that age yet where my kids are out at like baseball practice, but my sister-in-law is, and she says that she's like, they're always eating on the run with her kids. And so I know that that's something that works well for families, is to just do that pre-cooking and batch cooking and then freezing. The other thing is also relying on leftovers. I know some people are very opposed to leftovers. I happen to love them. And I think that there's a lot of...
That would be my husband.
Good. My husband does not like them either. But at the end of the day, like, first of all, I find with kids, if they like something, they don't care if they're having it a couple of days in a row.
No, I agree.
Yeah, they seem very happy, especially if it's like a pasta dish. They would have it every day if offered. And so if I make, let's say I do make like a baked ziti, then that's something that I know I'll have leftovers of, and I'll specifically plan it for the night that is before a very busy evening, so that it's already made, and so that, I can even have a plate or a container with it so that we can take that if we have to on the go, or so that it's ready and easy to pop in the microwave when we get home. So that, that's pretty much what I try to do. That's why thinking in advance. And for me, since I'm able to cook a little bit during the day, I'll pre-make stuff part of the way. Like last night I made a strata, which is basically like a savory bread pudding. And I got it all prepared ahead of time, and I just had to stick it in the oven when I got home with my girls and then cook it up while they were showering. And then it was ready when they were ready to eat, right before, they did everything else that they needed to, and then they ate and then they got ready for bed. So if you can do some type of prep ahead of time, that helps. And certainly meal prep for fresh foods is a little bit harder, because cutting up vegetables too far in advance, they don't last as well. But you can do a couple of days in advance and they should be fine.
I love networking. I'm part of a podcast network called Parents on Demand, or the Pod Network. We are a network of fun and educational podcasts perfect for your family. You can explore the shows in the network by going to parentsondemand.com and searching specific categories. Parents on Demand also has a download for a free network app on iOS and Android, so you can listen to your favorite shows or find new podcasts. Subscribe through iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play Music, iHeartRadio, or another provider. Every month, I will feature a podcast that I think will be helpful or of interest to you. Here's this month's podcast feature.
Hi, everybody. This is Jeannie Faulkner, and I'm the host of Common Sense Pregnancy and Parenting, the podcast. I'm a registered nurse with 20 years experience in labor and delivery and 10 working in global maternal health. I'm the author of Common Sense Pregnancy, and this podcast is my way of talking about everything we couldn't fit in the book and a whole lot more. With new guests and experts every week, we talk about pregnancy, parenting, politics, feminism, and healthcare. All of it. Come find us on iTunes, Libsyn, Stitcher, and the Parents on Demand Network.
I remember when I was working full-time and the kids were elementary and middle school, I remember meal planning like crazy. That was like my sanity. And using the crock pot. I used the crock pot probably at least once a week. And I didn't do a whole lot of different recipes in the crock pot. I had about 4 or 5 recipes that I kind of rotated. But do you find that to be a useful suggestion for busy families as well?
Yes, it definitely is. I have to admit, I don't have one, which is probably shocking for most people to hear. We just bought an Instant Pot because all the rage around it, and I'm still trying to figure out how to use it. The couple of times I've used it so far, it definitely has been quick and easy. We made chicken tacos, and that was, it took like 10 minutes basically to make the chicken for that. So that was really awesome. I haven't used the slow cooker setting of it yet, but I know a lot of people love their slow cooker. And if you know how to use it and you have one, it's definitely a good one to use because you can plug it in, put everything in, and leave and come home to a cooked meal. And again, most things that you make in a slow cooker make for good leftovers too. So.
I was just asked about the Instant Pot on another podcast, and I'm like, I've heard it, I've looked, and I've seen recipes for it floating around, but I have not looked into it for myself at all. I do have a crock pot, but it sounds like it's a combination of a pressure cooker, am I right, in terms of the speed?
Yes.
And a crock pot in terms of, I don't know, I guess how it's, I really don't know.
So like I said, I'm still playing around with it. I'm still trying to figure it all out, but it's definitely like a pressure cooker in that you can make meals very quickly. Like you can make a soup in 30 minutes, supposedly. I'll tell you when I make my next batch of chicken soup. But it also has slow cooker settings. So it's sort of the best of both worlds is what everybody says. And I'm not one to buy like gimmicky equipment because I just feel like kitchen space is precious and you should not waste it with silly things. But everybody just talks so much about it. And I figured for somebody who is trying to help other parents, get healthy meals on the table quickly, this is something that I should invest in and try to, figure it out and see how it works and try to come up with some recipes of my own with it.
Yeah, it definitely makes sense for your business and for your family because you're only going to get busier with those girls. So what are your favorite meals to make for your family?
So right now, one of our favorites is this Asian style Buddha bowl that I make with farro, and I make some crispy baked tofu that goes on top of it, and I roast up a lot of vegetables. So what I love about it for families is that I make all these different vegetables, I roast them, and I put each one in a separate dish. So I have my roasted carrots in one dish. I have my roasted sweet potatoes in another. Maybe I have some edamame beans in one bowl. I usually also add some broccoli that's roasted, whatever ingredients I have on hand. And then the kids can make their own bowls. So I used to, when they were younger, when I would do this, I would plate their food for them. And this is something that I've evolved as well in letting them plate their own food. And I actually find it works so much better for them to end up eating what's on their plate and having less food waste. So this is a really fun type of meal to do it with because they love going up to the counter and just picking every single thing that they get to put in their bowl. And they feel like they made their own. So that's one of our favorites, and that's on my website. Anything with salmon, my kids tend to love. So I have a couple of go-to salmon recipes. One has like an orange maple glaze. So you have a little bit of, that sweetness, sweet and sour, which the kids really like. And I usually pair that very simply with either like one of those bags of Uncle Ben's brown rice that like you can stick in the microwave for 90 seconds. Or if I have quinoa, because quinoa cooks up very quickly. So that's like a very easy grain to put with it. And then I'll roast some vegetable. Or if I've done my meal planning and been very diligent about my meal planning on the weekend, I'll have roasted vegetables already in my fridge that I'll just rewarm up. So those are some of my go-tos.
Those sound delicious. I've been recently doing bowls with my kids too. I do a burrito bowl. We've been doing noodle bowls. We did an Asian bowl this week too. And I'm a huge proponent of the make your own plate approach to feeding kids. So it almost always, I actually don't know a family where it doesn't work. I think it's a very liberating, autonomous way, independent way to let your children choose and learn about how much food to take and all of the, fine motor skills that go into it and self-regulation. There's so many good things to it. But even when your kids are teenagers and young adults, I mean, it's wonderful. It still is a system that works really well because they get to pick and choose what they want to put on. If they're not big fans of sweet potatoes, then they won't take the sweet potatoes, but they'll take extra broccoli or edamame or green beans or whatever else is there. So I love that idea.
Yeah. And it's really something that you can make any meal into for the most part. I mean, the idea of a family style meal, even like make your own pizza is another fun thing that we do. And I don't even use pizza dough most of the time because that's more work. I usually will take like a piece of naan or corn tortillas or, a lavash and let them put their own sauce on or whatever, whatever ingredients they want, whatever toppings they want. I'll provide bowls with, some cooked up vegetables and let them choose what they want. And sometimes they want the vegetables on it and sometimes they don't. And then if they don't, then they know that they take some vegetables on the side or I slice up some cucumbers or tomatoes, but the option is theirs.
Mm-hmm. That's great. It's a great approach. Now, when we look at parents and the barriers and obstacles that they have to get over in order to create healthy meals for their families, one of it is a lack of planning. So where do you see parents struggling the most when it comes to making meals for the family and even, doing this meal planning ahead of time?
So a lot of parents they don't think about it before they actually need to. So that's really the number one hurdle is marking your calendar, like maybe setting aside a reminder in your calendar for every Sunday or Saturday to meal plan so that you are actually reminded about it because it's so easy to get lost in the busyness of the rest of the weekend with kids and whatnot. So that's the number one thing is just sort of like planning it out in your schedule, scheduling it so that you sit down and do it. Another thing that I find is hard for parents is this idea that they need to be short order cooks because they have, let's say, 3 kids and each one likes something different. And they feel like if my kid doesn't like what I'm making, I have to make something that they like because otherwise they won't eat. And a lot of parents look at me like in shock when I tell them this, but I am very opposed to being a short order cook. And what I say is you make one meal, and as long as there's at least one food on the table that every child likes, and it can be a different food, but as long as there's one thing that everybody will eat, that's what's for dinner. And if they are really hungry, they will try something else. And parents look at me like, but then my kid will be hungry and they won't eat something else and they'll go to bed hungry. And I've seen it happen firsthand because I've definitely, as I said, my kids have become a little bit more selective now and things that they used to eat, they don't eat anymore. But I really do not give in to, okay, I'm going to make you this instead. I say, this is what's for dinner. If you are hungry and you want to eat it, you can. Otherwise, they always get fruit at the end of a meal. So you know that you're getting fruit and that's your choice. And sometimes they give in and they eat it and then they're pleasantly surprised, or sometimes they eat it and they're, oh, I really don't like this, but I'm hungry. And sometimes they don't eat it and they have their fruit and they're satisfied. And so it's sort of hard, but being a short order cook is too draining and tiring for parents. And we don't have time for that. But something else that helps with that struggle, with the short order cooking struggle, is getting the kids involved in the meal planning process. And obviously when the kids are really little, it's harder to do that. But as they get older, and I imagine that this is something maybe you did with your kids because you had, you had so many kids at different stages. But having them have a say, allowing them the space to say, Mom, this is what I want. I want the panko crusted chicken this week. And another one to say, and I want that pasta that I really love. And it's like, okay, so one night is, my girls are Charlotte and Sabrina. So one night is Charlotte's choice. One night is Sabrina's choice. And if Sabrina doesn't like what Charlotte's choice is, then I'll make sure that there's at least something on the table that she'll like. But this way they get a say and they also feel like really it's fun for them that they're able to say, especially when they're younger, they're able to say, it's my night, it's my choice tonight. Mm-hmm. That's fun for them.
Oh, yeah, it's fun. And they feel so important. They feel like an important part of the family when they're making those choices and decisions. I think that's wonderful. So moving on to, I know you will have some really good ideas about shortcuts to cooking because you're more of a cook than I am, for example, or some of my listeners. So when it comes to cooking, are there some easy shortcuts that you can tell the Nourish Child podcast listeners about that they might not know about in the kitchen, but could be real game changers for them?
Yeah. Some of my favorites are items that are already cut up or already prepared, but not prepared food. But here's an example, like garlic paste. And I don't mean like minced garlic in a jar, which is fine too, but there are a couple of companies that sell garlic paste in a tube. And I love garlic in everything. I think it adds so much flavor. But even for me, like the thought of every night having to, mince up some garlic is frustrating, or to grate it. So using something like that, the garlic paste, is a great way to be able to add that flavor without it taking extra time. There are a lot of other ones besides that come in those tubes. Gourmet Garden is a brand that has them. And there's another brand that comes in like the freezer aisle with little cubes. I think it's called Dorote. But those are ones that I see the most at supermarkets. And they also come in other pastes. I'm not sure. I never looked at all of them, but like ginger is another one that it comes in. So that's one type of ingredient to always have on hand. Another thing is places like Trader Joe's, which near us is huge, has so many ingredients that make your life easier. Like they have cubed butternut squash. They have shredded Brussels sprouts. They have zoodles now, which are zucchini noodles. There are so many of those like pre-cut up ingredients, so you don't have to do all that chopping. And this way you can still make your own homemade meal, but you're not standing in the kitchen on, chopping for hours. Because that honestly is what takes the most time in cooking for most people, is the prep. So those are some of the ingredients. And then you, of course, have your pantry items that you should always have on hand, like vegetable stock or chicken stock. And I always recommend the low sodium variety. Chopped tomatoes in a can or in the boxes are also another thing that I always have. Tomato sauce, looking for a good packaged tomato sauce. There's one from Trader Joe's that I love. A lot of tomato sauces have a lot of sugar in them. So you really have to read the ingredients, but you can definitely find good ones that are lower in sugar. And that's something that it's like, yeah, it's great to be able to make your own tomato sauce or marinara, but you don't have to. And that's not something that you need to spend your time on, when your time is limited.
Right. Those are great tips. I think anytime we can find shortcuts to make things quicker and easier and simpler, then we're going to be more likely to get into the kitchen and prep those meals, make those meals for our families.
Yes, absolutely. It's all about having the things on hand and knowing what's out there. And, it does take a little time to go to the supermarket and look to see what's available. So, that's something that once you do it, though, you've spent that time and now you know what you want to fill your pantry in, and it's easier to refresh it. It's easier to fill in what you already have.
Right. So this is such great information, Jessica. How can folks find your resources and follow you, find all the stuff that you're doing?
Sure. So my website is jessicalevinson.com, which is where you'll find my blog, which has lots of recipes. I have a recipe library. I just redid my site, actually. So it's a new look and a new feel. There's also my Menu Plan Monday, has its own category on there. So I really hope that listeners will check it out and use it for inspiration. Whether you follow along with it fully, that's not as important as, looking at it and getting inspired by it and doing what fits for your family. You can also find me on social media, Twitter, Pinterest, Instagram, and Facebook at jlevinsonrd. And I really hope that people will reach out and feel free to ask me questions.
Oh, I'm sure they will. And I'll include the links to all of your resources on the show notes over at jillcastle.com. And just the last question is, what's up for you in the future? What's 2018 holding for you?
That's a great question. I will see. I would really like to write another cookbook is what I would like to do. I had a cookbook back in 2011. I'd like to write another one, and we'll see if that happens for me. But in the meantime, continuing to feed my children well and, go through the challenges and get through them so that I can help other families get through them. That's my biggest goal right now.
That's a very awesome goal, I think.
Thank you.
Jessica, thank you so much for coming on the Nourished Child podcast. It was great to have you today.
Thank you so much.
Okay, everyone, I hope you feel inspired to change at least one little thing in your approach to meal planning. Maybe it's taking a step to actually write down your ideas or put them in your notes section of your phone for each day of the week. Or maybe you'll schedule a regular shopping day on your calendar and set an alert so that you are reminded that Sunday or Monday morning is your shopping day. Whatever you choose, I hope this episode has given you the inspiration and gentle nudge to tweak things for the better. For more information from Jessica, visit her website at www.jessicalevinson.com and stay in touch with her on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and Pinterest. If you can grab a quick minute, could you help the Nourish Child podcast grow? The 3 best ways to do so are to write a review on iTunes, subscribe to the show on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, Google Play Music, iHeartRadio, and more. Or just share the podcast on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest, Instagram, wherever you hang out. While you're working on meal planning, what are you doing about snack planning? I have the perfect resource for you. My Healthy Snack Planner helps you pick, time, serve, and supervise snacks for your child. You can find it over on my website by going to www.jillcastle.com/healthy-snack planner kids. That's Healthy Snack Planner Kids. Don't worry, I'll include the link in the show notes over at jillcastle.com. As always, thanks for joining me today. I am so glad you were here. Be proud of yourself for your efforts in the kitchen. Pledge to adopt one small tip from today's show. And most of all, happy meal planning! Don't forget to give the child in your life, big or small, a loving squeeze today. Bye for now.
Thanks for listening to the Nourish Child podcast, where the #1 goal is to help you grow a nourished child inside and out.